I stood in the corner of Willowbrook Country Club's grand ballroom, tugging at the sleeves of my thrift store blazer, watching my sister Sarah float around in her engagement party dress like she owned the place. The chandeliers cast everything in golden light, making the marble floors gleam and the crystal glasses sparkle on white-clothed tables. Sarah had always belonged in places like this. I felt like an imposter who had snuck past security. Brandon's parents approached with those practiced society smiles, the kind that never quite reach the eyes. His father, Gerald, wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, while his mother, Patricia, clutched a pearl-adorned clutch that screamed old money. "So Elvis," Patricia said, her voice honey-sweet with curiosity, "what is it that you do for work?" Before I could open my mouth to explain, my father, Frank, appeared beside me with that familiar smirk I had learned to dread since childhood. His face lit up with the kind of malicious joy that meant humiliation was coming. "He delivers meal kits," Dad announced with a hearty laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You know the boxes drives around in a van, dropping off groceries to people too lazy to shop for themselves." Gerald and Patricia nodded politely, their expressions shifting from interest to pity in real time. They exchanged a quick glance before turning away to find more interesting conversation. Suddenly, Gerald's phone rang with an urgent tone that cut through the chamber music. His face drained of all color as he answered. "Mr. Secretary," his voice cracked. "Yes, he's here. I understand." He hung up stunned, staring directly at me. The silence that followed Gerald's phone call felt heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above us. His wife, Patricia, gripped his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric of his jacket. Sarah stopped mid-conversation with her bridesmaids, sensing the shift in energy across the room. "I don't understand." Gerald stammered, his usual confident demeanor completely shattered. "The Secretary of State wants to speak with you, immediately, about a classified national security matter." My father's smug expression melted like ice cream on hot pavement. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, resembling a fish gasping for air. Sarah pushed through the small crowd that had begun to gather, her emerald dress rustling as she moved. "There must be some mistake," Patricia whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden quiet. I straightened my shoulders and met Gerald's bewildered gaze. "There's no mistake. I'm Elvis Thompson, Federal Intelligence Analyst, currently assigned to Operation Harvest Moon. For the past 2 years, I've been working undercover to infiltrate a suspected domestic terrorism network that's been using meal delivery services as a front for their operations." The confession hit the group like a thunderbolt. Sarah's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a cascade of crystal and golden liquid. Frank stumbled backward, catching himself against a nearby table laden with appetizers. My van routes weren't random grocery deliveries. I continued watching my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been fear. They were carefully planned surveillance operations tracking suspicious package movements across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Every address I visited, every delivery I made was part of a federal investigation into a group we believed was moving bomb components and weapons through legitimate shipping networks. Gerald's professional composure began returning as the implications sank in. "You graduated from Georgetown," he said slowly as if testing the words. "International Relations and Computer Science. Summa cum laude. Class of 2018, I confirmed." The delivery driver cover story was essential to protect both my identity and the integrity of the investigation. After the bombing of the federal courthouse in Richmond 3 years ago, the Bureau needed someone who could blend into blue-collar communities without raising suspicion. Patricia's hand flew to her throat where a string of pearls caught the light. "We had no idea. Your father told us you had dropped out of college, that you were struggling to find direction." Frank's face had gone ashen. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled sound emerged. Sarah stared at me with wide eyes as if seeing me for the first time in her life. The work is dangerous. I explained, my voice steady, despite the emotional turmoil churning in my chest. Most of my colleagues don't know my real assignment. My handlers constructed an entire false identity, complete with employment records and rental agreements. The goal was to become invisible, just another working-class guy trying to make ends meet. Brandon approached cautiously, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. How long have you been living this double life? 26 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. I replied without hesitation. I've driven over 60,000 miles, made contact with 17 suspected cell members, and gathered intelligence that's led to preliminary arrests in 6 states. Gerald pulled out his phone again, this time to check the caller ID he had just received. The Secretary of State, he murmured, showing the screen to his wife. This is real. My father finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I told everyone you were a failure. The weight of my father's admission hung in the perfumed air of the country club like smoke from a fire that had been burning for decades. Frank's hands shook as he reached for a nearby chair, his knees buckling slightly under the burden of what he had just confessed. A failure, I repeated, letting the word roll around in my mouth like broken glass. That's what you told them. Sarah stepped closer, her engagement ring catching the light as she clenched her fists. What do you mean, Dad? What did you tell people about Elvis? Frank's composure cracked like an eggshell. Tears began streaming down his weathered cheeks, carving paths through the foundation his barber had applied to cover the age spots. I was scared, he whispered, his voice breaking on each syllable. Scared of what? My voice carried an edge I didn't recognize, years of suppressed anger finally finding its way to the surface. That you'd leave us behind. Frank sobbed, collapsing into the chair with the gracelessness of a man whose world was falling apart. Just like my brother did. David was always the smart one, always the one with potential. Got a scholarship to Harvard, graduated with honors, moved to California for some tech job. Never came back. Never called. Never even sent a Christmas card. Patricia and Gerald exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly regretting their decision to remain within earshot of this family implosion. But something kept their feet planted on the marble floor, perhaps the same morbid fascination that draws people to watch car accidents. So you sabotaged me instead? I asked, my voice rising despite my training in emotional control. You thought destroying my confidence would keep me close? Frank nodded miserably. I told your 3rd grade teacher you were struggling with reading when you were already devouring novels meant for high schoolers. I convinced your guidance counselor in middle school that you weren't college material. I discouraged every scholarship application, every advanced placement class, every opportunity that might have taken you away from home. Sarah's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. That's why you told me he dropped out of Georgetown. He never dropped out. Frank admitted, his shoulders shaking with each breath. He graduated with highest honors, made the dean's list every semester. I just couldn't bear the thought of losing him the way I lost David. You didn't lose David, I said quietly, my anger transforming into something colder and more controlled. You pushed him away with the same toxic behavior you've been using on me my entire life. My sister's voice trembled with barely contained rage. How many family events did you convince me not to invite him to? How many times did you fill my head with lies about his supposed failures and disappointments? Frank's crying intensified, but he managed to choke out an answer. Christmas dinner 2 years ago. Your birthday party last year. The family reunion in Virginia Beach. I told you he was embarrassed about his job, that he wouldn't want to be around successful relatives. Gerald cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should give you some privacy for this conversation. No, I said, firmly, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. Stay. You're about to become family, and families should understand the truth about each other. Patricia clutched her purse tighter but nodded respectfully. Of course. Brandon remained frozen in place, his usual easy charm, replaced by the wide-eyed expression of someone watching a nature documentary about predators. I remember those events. I continued, turning back to my father. I remember wondering why I wasn't invited. I remember calling Sarah to ask about Christmas dinner and being told the plans had changed. I thought I had done something wrong, said something offensive, disappointed you both somehow. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, tears beginning to flow freely down her cheeks. Oh my God, Elvis, I'm so sorry. I believed every word he said. He's been protecting all of us. I said, my voice carrying the weight of revelation. While you were spreading lies about my supposed failures, I was risking my life to keep communities safe from domestic terrorists. While you were embarrassed to have me at family gatherings, I was working 18-hour days, gathering intelligence that could prevent attacks on federal buildings, schools, and public venues. Frank looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I know, and I hate myself for it. But I was so terrified of being alone, of having my children succeed beyond my reach. My own father did the same thing to me and my brother. He pitted us against each other, made us compete for scraps of approval that never came. The country club's wait staff had begun to notice the commotion, several servers slowing their pace as they passed our corner of the ballroom. Sarah waved them away with a gesture that suggested this was a private family matter. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said firmly. Breaking cycles of toxic behavior requires courage and self-reflection, not perpetuating the damage to the next generation. Gerald's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen with growing anxiety. The Secretary of State is asking for an update. Should I tell him you'll call back? I looked around at my broken family at the engagement party that had transformed into an impromptu therapy session at the wreckage of relationships that had been built on lies and manipulation. Not yet, I said, my training as an analyst taking over. Something else is happening here. My phone vibrated against my chest with the specific pattern that meant urgent communication from my handler. 3 short buzzes, pause, 2 long ones, pause, 3 short again. Emergency protocol. I excused myself from the family drama and stepped behind a marble pillar to read the encrypted message. The text made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Cover blown. Cell identified, fed at party. Imminent threat to venue. ETA 15 minutes. Explosives confirmed. I closed my eyes and took 3 deep breaths, the way Agent Hayes had trained me to do when operational stress threatened to overwhelm analytical thinking. When I opened them, the familiar ballroom had transformed into a potential battlefield. Every exit, every window, every structural weakness became part of a tactical assessment. Walking back to the group, I kept my expression neutral, despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Gerald, I said quietly, what did you do before retirement? He straightened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the authority he must have wielded in his professional life. 28 years with the Bureau, retired as Associate Director of the Criminal Investigative Division. Perfect. I need your help. We have a situation. Patricia's face went white. What kind of situation? The terrorist cell I've been tracking has discovered my identity. They're en route to this location with explosive devices planning to eliminate me and cause maximum casualties in the process. I kept my voice level professional, the way Hayes had taught me to deliver bad news without causing panic. Sarah grabbed Brandon's arm so tightly that her knuckles turned white. You mean they're coming here now? The Willowbrook Country Club has been on their target list for 6 months. I explained, scanning the room for potential civilian evacuation routes. High-profile venue, wealthy clientele, symbolic value for their anti-establishment message. They've been waiting for the right opportunity. Gerald's FBI training kicked in immediately. What's our timeline? 12 to 14 minutes. based on their last known location and typical traffic patterns. I pulled out my phone and began typing rapid instructions to Agent Hayes. They're using the same delivery van network I've been infiltrating, so they'll approach from the service entrance to avoid the main security checkpoint. Frank had stopped crying his paternal instincts, overriding his emotional breakdown. What do we do? How do we get everyone out safely? We don't evacuate, I said firmly. 300 people rushing for the exits would create a stampede, and they're probably watching the main entrances anyway. We implement controlled dispersal while coordinating with federal response teams. Brandon found his voice, though it cracked slightly. How can we help? You know this venue better than anyone, I said, studying the layout with new eyes. Multiple exit points, service corridors, staff areas that guests don't typically access. We need to move people away from the main ballroom without causing panic. Patricia surprised me by stepping forward with remarkable composure. I'll coordinate with the event staff. We can announce a special surprise in the garden area, get people moving naturally toward the rear of the building. Sarah nodded quickly. The bridal party can help. We'll start encouraging people to step outside for photographs. Gerald had already pulled out his phone and was speaking in the clipped, authoritative tone I recognized from law enforcement communications. This is retired Associate Director Gerald Morrison. I need immediate tactical response to Willowbrook Country Club. Federal agent under active threat. My phone buzzed again. Hayes had received my message and was coordinating with local FBI and ATF units. But even with immediate response, we were looking at 8 to 10 minutes before backup arrived. There's something else, I said, watching Frank's face carefully. My cover identity was compromised from the inside. Someone in the delivery company has been feeding information to the cell, which means they know exactly who I am and why I'm here. Gerald's expression hardened. Double agent? More than that. Someone who's been playing both sides, using my investigation to help the terrorists plan their operations while making the FBI think we were closing in on them. I felt sick thinking about how many times I'd reported back to my supposed supervisors, unknowingly giving the enemy intelligence about our progress. Frank struggled to his feet, his face set with grim determination. What can I do? How can I help protect my son? For the first time in decades, I saw my father not as the man who had sabotaged my confidence, but as someone willing to put his life on the line for his family. Stay close to Sarah and Brandon. If shooting starts, get them to the kitchen area. Commercial kitchens have reinforced walls and multiple exits. Patricia had returned from her conversation with the event coordinator. The staff is on board. They're going to announce a champagne toast in the garden in 5 minutes. That should move about half the guests outside. Perfect, Gerald said, checking his watch. Elvis, what do you know about their operational methods? They prefer vehicle-borne explosive devices. I replied, my mind racing through months of surveillance reports. Secondary attacks to target first responders. They'll want to cause maximum damage to the building structure, but they also want to send a message by eliminating a federal agent publicly. Brandon had been quietly listening, but now he spoke up with surprising insight. The service entrance connects directly to the kitchen. If they're coming in that way, they'll have access to the main ballroom within 60 seconds of arrival. Sarah looked at her fiancé with new respect. How do you know that? I helped plan tonight's layout with the caterers. We went through the entire building 3 times to optimize the flow of service. He turned to me with growing understanding. You didn't just happen to attend this party, did you? You knew it was a target. I nodded grimly. I've been attending public events in this area for the past 4 months, always armed, always ready. When Sarah invited me to her engagement party, I cross-referenced the venue with our target list. I came here tonight to protect my family, even if they didn't know they needed protection. Frank's voice was barely a whisper. You've been watching over us this whole time. Someone had to, I replied, surprised by the lack of bitterness in my own voice. Despite everything between us, you're still my family. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the service area, I spotted the familiar white van with Fresh Harvest Delivery painted on the side. My stomach dropped as I recognized the license plate from my own route assignments. They weren't just using the delivery network as a front anymore. They had taken over completely. The van's driver stepped out, and my world tilted on its axis. Marcus Walsh, my supposed supervisor at Fresh Harvest, emerged wearing the same company polo shirt I had worn hundreds of times, but now I could see the tactical vest underneath the earpiece curled around his left ear, the controlled way he surveyed the building's exterior. No, I breathed, the pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. It's Marcus. Gerald followed my gaze and immediately understood the implications. Your handler, my supervisor at the delivery company. He's been assigning my routes, reviewing my reports, giving me intel about suspected drop locations. I felt like I might vomit as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. He's been feeding me false information for months, using my legitimate investigation to map out target sites and federal response patterns. Two more men emerged from the van's rear doors, both carrying large catering containers that were almost certainly packed with explosives. They moved with military precision toward the service entrance, their coordination suggesting extensive training and planning. He played me perfectly. I continued, my voice tight with controlled rage. Every route he assigned, every address he flagged as suspicious, every piece of intelligence I gathered and reported back to him, he was using to build a comprehensive picture of federal counterterrorism capabilities. Patricia had frozen mid-step, her face pale with dawning horror. The catering containers? They're not bringing food, are they? Improvised explosive devices. Gerald confirmed grimly his FBI training, allowing him to assess the threat with professional detachment. Probably enough to bring down a significant portion of the building. Sarah grabbed my arm with desperate strength. Can we stop them? Can you call your real handler? I was already typing frantically on my encrypted phone, sending Agent Hayes a priority alert with Marcus's description and the vehicle information. But even as I sent the message, I knew the response time would be too long. The tactical teams were still 6 to 8 minutes out, and Marcus's team was already moving through the building. There's something else? I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Marcus has been setting me up to take the fall. When those explosives detonate, all the evidence will point to the federal agent who had access to the building, who knew the layout, who had been conducting surveillance in the area for months. Frank stepped closer, his earlier emotional breakdown replaced by protective determination. What do you mean? He's planned this as a false flag operation. Kill hundreds of people, frame a federal agent as a domestic terrorist, and disappear while the Bureau tears itself apart trying to figure out how one of their own turned. I checked my service weapon, confirming the full magazine and chambered round. It's brilliant and absolutely evil. Brandon had been listening intently, and now he spoke with surprising tactical awareness. They'll need to get close to you to make the frame job work. They can't just blow up the building and claim you did it remotely. Exactly. Marcus needs to capture or kill me in a way that looks like I was either a willing participant or a terrorist who was stopped by heroic citizens. I looked around at my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in years. That's why he's taking the risk of coming inside instead of just triggering the explosives from a distance. Gerald checked his own concealed weapon, a habit that apparently survived retirement. How many are we dealing with? Marcus plus at least 2 others from what I saw. Possibly more already inside posing as catering staff. I scanned the ballroom, looking for faces that didn't quite fit behaviors that seemed off, people who were positioned strategically rather than socially. Patricia suddenly gripped her husband's arm. The new servers, the ones who arrived 20 minutes ago with additional champagne. I didn't recognize them from our planning meetings. My blood turned cold. They're already inside. Marcus's team has been infiltrating while I was dealing with family drama. How do we identify them? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the terror I could see in her eyes. Look for people who aren't drinking, aren't eating, aren't engaging in small talk. They'll be positioned near exits, load-bearing walls, or areas where they can observe the crowd without participating in it. I pointed toward 3 men distributed around the ballroom who fit exactly that description. There by the main entrance, there near the band stage, and there by the emergency exit. Frank studied the men I had indicated, his expression growing grim. They're all watching you. As if summoned by our conversation, Marcus Walsh appeared in the ballroom's main entrance, no longer bothering to maintain his cover as a simple delivery supervisor. He wore a confident smile that sent ice through my veins, the expression of a man who believed he had already won. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and his smile widened into something predatory. He raised his hand in a casual wave as if greeting an old friend at a social gathering. Then he began walking directly toward us, weaving between clusters of party guests with the purposeful stride of someone who had been planning this moment for months. "Game time," I murmured to Gerald, who nodded and began subtly positioning himself for whatever was about to unfold. Marcus approached our group with the easy confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. "Elvis Thompson," he called out jovially as he drew near, his voice carrying just far enough to attract attention from nearby guests. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here." The conversations around us began to quiet as people sensed the tension radiating from our small group. Marcus's casual demeanor stood in stark contrast to the coiled readiness I could feel building in both Gerald and myself. "Marcus," I replied evenly, my training helping me maintain composure despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "I wasn't expecting to see you at my sister's engagement party." His laugh was genuine, which somehow made it more unsettling. "Oh, but this is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Do you know how long I've been waiting for an opportunity like this?" Marcus stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the cologne he wore to mask the scent of explosives and gun oil. His confidence radiated from every pore, the self-satisfaction of someone who believed he had orchestrated the perfect crime. "You've been such a helpful little puppet," he continued, his voice carrying just enough for our immediate group to hear. "Running around in your delivery van, mapping out federal response times, identifying security weaknesses at potential targets. You made my job incredibly easy." I let my shoulders sag slightly, allowing my face to show the defeat and shock that Marcus expected to see. "You played me from the beginning." "From the very beginning," he confirmed, practically purring with satisfaction. "Every route I assigned, every suspicious address I sent you to investigate, every piece of intelligence you so dutifully reported back to me. You were building my target list while thinking you were building yours." Gerald remained perfectly still, but I could sense his law enforcement instincts cataloging every word for evidence. Sarah and Brandon stood frozen, their faces masks of horror, as they realized the scope of the betrayal unfolding before them. "The beautiful part," Marcus continued, "is that after tonight, all the evidence will point to a federal agent who went rogue. Your fingerprints on the delivery van, your access to the building, your surveillance of the target location. When the FBI investigates, they'll find a clear trail leading directly to their own man." I nodded slowly, playing the role of the defeated operative who had just realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "It's brilliant. Diabolical, but brilliant." "I thought you'd appreciate the elegance," Marcus said, his smile widening. "You always were too smart for your own good. That's what made you so useful and ultimately so dangerous." What Marcus didn't know, what his overwhelming arrogance prevented him from considering, was that I had discovered his deception 3 weeks earlier. A small discrepancy in delivery routes had caught my attention, a pattern that made no tactical sense if the goal was actually intercepting terrorist communications. When I had quietly investigated on my own time using skills learned in my computer science program, I had uncovered the truth about Marcus's double identity. Since then, I had been working with Agent Jennifer Hayes from a completely different FBI division feeding Marcus carefully crafted false intelligence while building a real case against his network. Every route he assigned, every target he suggested, every piece of information he thought I was naively passing along to the bureau I had been recording and documenting for a parallel investigation. The recording device hidden in my jacket pocket had been running since the moment Marcus approached our group. Every word of his confession was being captured in digital clarity that would hold up in federal court. "You know, Marcus," I said conversationally, "there's something I should probably tell you." His expression flickered slightly, the first crack in his confident facade. "What's that?" "3 weeks ago, when you sent me to that warehouse in Baltimore, the one you claimed was a suspected bomb-making facility, I ran the address through a different database, one you didn't know I had access to." I kept my voice level, almost friendly. Turns out it was a perfectly legitimate storage facility owned by a company that donates surplus food to homeless shelters. The color began draining from Marcus's face. "That's impossible. My intelligence was solid." "Your intelligence was fabricated." I continued, still maintaining the tone of casual conversation. So I started digging deeper. Computer forensics, financial records, communications analysis. The kind of investigation they teach at Georgetown, but don't usually cover in delivery driver training. Marcus's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the weapon concealed beneath his catering uniform. But Gerald's slight shift in position discouraged any sudden movements. "I've been working with Agent Hayes from Counterintelligence for the past 21 days. I explained, watching Understanding and Panic War for control of Marcus's expression. "Every piece of false intelligence I've fed you, every fake report I've submitted, every route assignment you've given me, it's all been part of a controlled operation designed to trace your entire network." The blood had completely drained from Marcus's face now. "You're lying. Agent Hayes is coordinating with tactical teams positioned around this building right now. Your 2 associates by the emergency exits have been under surveillance since they arrived. The explosives in your catering containers have been remotely disabled by bomb disposal specialists who entered through the kitchen service tunnels 20 minutes ago." Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. "That's impossible. We would have seen them. We've been watching every entrance." "You've been watching the entrances you know about," Gerald interjected quietly. "But this facility was designed with multiple security access points that aren't on the standard architectural plans, the kind of information that would be available to a retired FBI associate director who helped design security protocols for high-profile venue protection." The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. His eyes darted around the ballroom, suddenly seeing the carefully positioned agents who had been posing as guests, waitstaff, and event coordinators. What had seemed like a perfectly orchestrated trap had become a carefully constructed counter-operation. "You see, Marcus," I continued, "the thing about being undercover is that it teaches you how to recognize when other people are playing roles too. 3 weeks was plenty of time to turn your own operation against you." Patricia, who had been listening with growing amazement, spoke up with quiet authority. "The additional security I thought we hired for the event. Those weren't private contractors, were they?" "FBI tactical specialists," Gerald confirmed. "Jennifer Hayes reached out to me directly once Elvis made contact with her division. We've been planning this reversal for weeks." Marcus's hand was now hovering openly near his weapon, but the subtle movements of agents throughout the ballroom made it clear that any aggressive action would be immediately and overwhelmingly countered. "How?" he whispered, his voice cracking with the stress of realizing how completely his plan had been undermined. "You underestimated me," I said simply. "You saw a delivery driver and assumed that was all I was. You never bothered to research my actual background, my education, my analytical capabilities. You thought you were manipulating a useful idiot, but you were actually confessing your crimes to a federal agent who was building a case against you." Agent Hayes materialized beside our group as if she had been there all along, her badge clearly visible and her weapon drawn but held low and non-threatening. "Marcus Walsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism." federal weapons violations, and conspiracy to commit mass murder. The ballroom erupted in controlled chaos as tactical agents revealed themselves throughout the venue. Marcus's associates were taken into custody with professional efficiency, their weapons secured, and their persons searched for additional threats. Sarah grabbed my arm with shaking hands. "It's over. It's over." I confirmed finally, allowing myself to feel the relief that had been building behind the wall of operational necessity. Marcus and his entire network are finished. Frank, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, son. I'm so incredibly proud of you." Agent Hayes finished reading Marcus's rights, while tactical teams secured the last of his associates. The explosives had indeed been safely disabled, and a thorough sweep of the building confirmed that no additional threats remained. The engagement party guests, most of whom had been evacuated to the garden area during the champagne toast, were slowly being allowed back into the ballroom as the all-clear was given. "Elvis," Agent Hayes said, approaching our family group with a satisfied expression, "I need to debrief you on the scope of what we've accomplished here tonight." Gerald straightened with professional interest. How extensive was the network? Based on the intelligence Elvis gathered over the past 3 weeks, combined with the evidence we collected tonight, we've identified and arrested 43 individuals across 12 states. Hayes replied, consulting a tablet device. "This operation has dismantled what we believe to be one of the largest domestic terrorism networks currently active in the United States." Sarah's eyes widened. 43 people. Bomb makers, weapons suppliers, financial supporters, safe house operators, and recruitment specialists, Hayes continued. Elvis's undercover work allowed us to map the entire organizational structure. The intelligence he provided has prevented at least 6 planned attacks on federal buildings, public schools, and community gathering spaces. Patricia clutched her husband's arm. 6 attacks, a courthouse in Richmond, an elementary school in Norfolk, a community center in Baltimore that hosts citizenship ceremonies for new Americans, a synagogue in Alexandria, a black church in Petersburg, and a Hispanic cultural festival in Virginia Beach. Hayes's voice carried the weight of lives, saved futures, preserved families kept intact. The magnitude of what we had accomplished was staggering. Not just Marcus's cell, not just tonight's attack, but months of patient investigation that had unraveled a conspiracy spanning multiple states and potentially hundreds of victims. Frank wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "All this time, I thought you were wasting your potential." "Actually, sir," Hayes interjected with obvious respect, "your son's work on this case is being reviewed for the Presidential Medal of Freedom. His dedication, analytical skills, and personal courage in maintaining his cover while building this case represent exactly the kind of service this award was created to recognize." The silence that followed was profound. Brandon, who had been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke. "The Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States." Gerald explained, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "I worked for the Bureau for 28 years and never saw anyone recommended for recognition at that level." Agent Hayes' phone buzzed and she stepped away to take the call. When she returned, her expression was a mixture of professionalism and barely contained excitement. "That was the director," she said. "The Secretary of State wants to speak with you personally, Elvis. He's calling in 10 minutes. As if on cue, Gerald's phone rang with the same urgent tone that had started this entire revelation. "Mr. Secretary?" He answered formally, then listened for several moments before extending the phone toward me. "Elvis Thompson," I said, accepting the device with hands that were surprisingly steady. Agent Thompson came the unmistakable voice of the Secretary of State. "I want to personally commend you for your exceptional service to your country. The intelligence you've gathered and the risks you've taken have quite literally saved hundreds of lives. Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job. No, Agent Thompson. You were doing far more than your job. You were upholding the highest ideals of public service, often at great personal cost. There was a pause, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I understand your cover assignment required significant personal sacrifices, including allowing your own family to believe you had failed professionally. Yes, sir. That level of commitment to mission success at such personal expense represents the very best of American intelligence work. I want you to know that your service record will reflect not just the operational success of this case, but the character you've demonstrated throughout. After the call ended, I handed the phone back to Gerald, who was looking at me with obvious respect and admiration. There's something else, Agent Hayes said, consulting her tablet again. Gerald, your assistance tonight was invaluable. The director asked me to extend an offer for you to consult on a new interagency task force focused on domestic terrorism prevention. Gerald's face lit up with the expression of someone who had just been offered a chance to return to meaningful work. I'd be honored. Patricia smiled broadly. And I suppose this means I should get used to having federal agents at family gatherings. Sarah, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, Elvis. I'm sorry I believed Dad's lies. I'm sorry I excluded you from family events. I'm sorry I thought you were a failure when you were actually a hero. The embrace lasted long enough for years of accumulated hurt to begin healing. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I want you to walk me down the aisle, she said firmly. Not Dad, you. You're the one who's been protecting this family all along. Brandon nodded enthusiastically. And I want you to be my best man. If you'll have me as a brother-in-law, that is. The generosity of their offers, the complete reversal of how they saw me, felt almost overwhelming after years of being dismissed and marginalized. I'd be honored, I said simply. Frank approached slowly, his earlier breakdown replaced by something resembling humility. Can you ever forgive me? He asked quietly. Can you ever forgive a father who was too scared and selfish to celebrate his son's success? I looked at this man who had caused me so much pain, who had sabotaged my confidence and poisoned my relationships with lies and manipulation. The anger was still there, the hurt was still real, but it was joined by something else now understanding. I can forgive you, I said carefully, but things have to change. No more lies, no more sabotage, no more trying to keep me small to make yourself feel secure. He nodded eagerly. Whatever you need. Therapy, family counseling, whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Agent Hayes cleared her throat gently. There's one more thing. Elvis, the director, has approved a promotion for you. Senior intelligence analyst with a significant salary increase and your choice of field assignments. You've more than earned it. As the immediate chaos of the evening began to settle, I looked around at my family with new eyes. Sarah, radiant in her engagement dress, no longer seemed like someone from a different world. Brandon had proven himself capable of grace under pressure. Patricia and Gerald had shown genuine concern for my well-being. Even Frank, despite his toxic behavior, had been willing to put himself at risk to protect his children when it mattered. The evening that had started with humiliation and family dysfunction had transformed into something I never could have imagined. Recognition, reconciliation, and the beginning of authentic relationships built on truth rather than manipulation. You know what the best part of all this is? Sarah asked, linking her arm through mine. What's that? You don't have to be ashamed of your job anymore. You can tell people exactly who you are and what you do. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Actually, I was never ashamed. I was just protecting everyone else. 6 months later, I stood in the same ballroom where my world had changed forever, but this time, I wore the dress blue uniform of a senior intelligence analyst, complete with the commendations I had earned for my work on Operation Harvest Moon. Sarah's wedding day had finally arrived, and the autumn sunlight streaming through those same floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to transform everything it touched into gold. The guest list had expanded considerably since the engagement party. Agent Hayes sat in the third row with her husband and teenage daughter. Gerald and Patricia had become something like surrogate parents, offering guidance and genuine affection without the toxic manipulation I had grown up with. Several of my FBI colleagues had traveled from Washington to attend, turning what might have been a simple family wedding into a celebration of service and sacrifice. Frank approached me near the altar, looking distinguished in his formal wear, but carrying himself with a humility that was still new and sometimes uncomfortable for him. "Are you ready for this, son?" The word son carried different weight now. 3 months of family therapy had helped us understand the generational patterns of fear and control that had shaped our relationship. Frank's father had used the same tactics of sabotage and competition, terrified that his children's success would somehow diminish his own worth. Breaking that cycle required constant vigilance and commitment to honest communication. "I'm ready," I said, adjusting my white gloves and checking my uniform one final time. "I need to say something before we begin." Frank said, his voice carrying the weight of months of reflection and growth. "In front of all these people, in front of your colleagues and friends, I want to acknowledge what I put you through. I want everyone to know that your success happened, despite my interference, not because of it. The healing wasn't complete, might never be complete, but Frank's willingness to publicly acknowledge his mistakes represented genuine progress. I appreciate that, Dad." The music began, and the guests rose to their feet as the processional started. Sarah appeared at the back of the aisle, in a gown that seemed to capture every photon of light in the room. Her smile radiated pure joy as she saw me waiting to escort her to her new life with Brandon. As we walked together down that aisle, I reflected on the lessons that the past 6 months had taught me. Success isn't measured by other people's approval or recognition. True strength comes from staying committed to your values and your mission, even when the people closest to you try to tear you down. Sometimes the greatest act of love is protecting people who don't even know they need protection. Frank had given a speech at the reception that brought most of the attendees to tears. He talked about the courage it takes to admit when you're wrong, the strength required to seek help in changing destructive patterns, and the grace his children had shown in allowing him to rebuild their relationships on a foundation of honesty and respect. "My son saved hundreds of lives," he said into the microphone, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. "But more importantly, he saved this family from the toxic legacy I was determined to pass down. He showed us that breaking cycles of fear and control requires courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to truth." The transformation hadn't been easy for any of us. Sarah had to confront her own role in perpetuating family dynamics, recognizing how quickly she had accepted negative narratives about me without seeking my perspective. Brandon had struggled with the revelation that his future in-laws carried such complicated emotional baggage, but he had ultimately embraced the challenge of joining a family committed to growth and healing. Gerald had indeed taken the consulting position with the Domestic Terrorism Task Force, and we had developed a mentoring relationship that filled some of the gaps left by my father's emotional absence during my formative years. Patricia had connected me with professional networks in Washington that helped me navigate the political complexities of intelligence work. Agent Hayes had become both a colleague and a friend, someone who understood the unique stresses of undercover work and the challenge of maintaining authentic relationships while living with classified responsibilities. Her recommendation had been instrumental in my promotion and my selection for the Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony, which would take place the following month. The medal ceremony would be attended by my entire family, including Frank, who would finally have the opportunity to publicly celebrate his son's achievements rather than undermining them. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who had spent decades trying to keep me small would now sit in the Rose Garden while the President of the United States recognized my service to the country. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the relationship I had developed with myself. Years of internalized criticism and self-doubt had been gradually replaced by a quiet confidence based on genuine accomplishment rather than external validation. I no longer needed my father's approval to know my worth, which paradoxically made it possible to forgive him and rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. The work continued, of course. Domestic terrorism remained a significant threat, and my expertise in infiltration and analysis was needed on new cases. But now I had a support system that knew and valued the real me people who understood both the importance of the work and the personal cost of doing it well. As Sarah and Brandon exchanged vows promising to build their marriage on honesty, trust, and mutual respect, I thought about the lesson that had emerged from our family's journey through crisis and healing. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are acting from their own deep wounds and fears. That doesn't excuse their behavior or minimize the damage they cause, but it can help us understand that their actions often say more about their own limitations than about our worth. True healing requires both accountability and grace. The person who hurts you must acknowledge their behavior and commit to change. But the person who was hurt must also find the courage to remain open to relationship, to risk being vulnerable again, to choose love over self-protection. The path forward isn't always clear and setbacks are inevitable. But when families commit to truth-telling, emotional growth, and mutual respect, even the most damaged relationships can be transformed into sources of strength and support. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah kissed her new husband, I felt a deep sense of peace that had nothing to do with professional recognition or public acclaim. This was the satisfaction of knowing that I had stayed true to my values despite years of opposition, that I had protected people who needed protecting, and that I had helped my family break free from generations of toxic patterns. The reception that followed was a celebration not just of Sarah and Brandon's marriage, but of second chances, family healing, and the power of truth to transform even the most broken relationships. Standing in that same ballroom where my father had once humiliated me, in front of strangers surrounded now by colleagues who respected my work, and family members who finally knew and valued the real me, I understood that the greatest victories aren't always the ones that make headlines. Sometimes the most important triumph is simply having the courage to be yourself, to do the right thing, and to keep loving people even when they make it difficult. That's a lesson worth remembering, worth sharing, and worth living by. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where family members or close friends tried to diminish your achievements or discourage your dreams? How did you handle it? Did you find the strength to pursue your goals anyway? Or did their negativity hold you back? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might inspire someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your true strength. And please share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's approval. Thank you for taking this journey with me. And remember that your dreams and goals are valid, regardless of who tries to tell you otherwise. Keep moving forward, keep believing in yourself, and never let anyone convince you to make yourself smaller to accommodate their fears. Until next time, stay strong and keep growing.